The Rings of Power Season 2 is over, and to many the show simply doesn't feel like Tolkien's world, and I find this extremely interesting. I want to approach this with a curious mindset. I'm sure the intention was that the show should mimic Peter Jackson's films to a certain extent, at least enough to get that same amount of success. Yet the show seems to get further and further away from that, and viewership only seems to be going down. Now there are many reasons why The Rings of Power doesn't feel like Middle-earth, or anything Tolkien wrote, nor like Peter Jackson's films. Sadly, I can't address them all in one video. That would probably take several hours. Many of you have probably already heard of the slow pacing, terrible dialogue, bad story structure, cliché plot elements, senseless storylines, and low quality costumes and props. If not from me, then from other channels. While that is interesting, I won't dive into that in this video. Nor will I comment on every single lore detail they get wrong. I got plenty of videos that already do that. Instead, this video will focus on the fundamental elements of Tolkien's world and philosophy, and how the show fails to make it feel like Middle-earth. That being said, I am working on a different video where I'll address why it's so hard for modern films and shows to adapt epics, and I'll use The Rings of Power as an example as it fits perfectly, so expect a video on that at some point. Of course, deviating from the lore will make it feel less like Tolkien, but getting the fundamental elements wrong will actually work against what they're trying to achieve. I won't address everything in this video, as some of it will be brought up in the other one. First we'll go through the true philosophy of Tolkien's works, and then end with a conclusion, and see what The Rings of Power is missing. But let's get started. Chapter 1. The Man, the Myth, the Tale of Middle-earth. In order to adapt Tolkien's work properly, we must first understand who he was. He was a devout Catholic, and the Christian themes are inserted into the Lord of the Rings numerous places. Though the god in the world, Eru, is never actually mentioned specifically, but only implied to. As Tolkien writes in the foreword, The Lord of the Rings is of course a fundamentally religious and Catholic work, unconsciously so at first, but consciously in the revision. That is why I have not put in, or have cut out, practically all references to anything like religion, to cults, or practices in the imaginary world, but a religious element is absorbed into the story and the symbolism. Eru's role in The Lord of the Rings should not be forgotten though, as he is actually central to the story. It is him that makes Bilbo find the One Ring in The Hobbit, and it is him in the end that makes Gollum fall into Mount Doom. This is done through mercy though, the mercy shown to Gollum many times by some of the greatest characters like Bilbo, Frodo, Faramir, and Sam. If they had not spared his life, it would not have allowed for the scenario to play out in the end, and the quest would have failed, something Frodo also points out after the ring is destroyed. So in other words, in the end, the victory over evil belongs not only to the heroes of the War of the Ring, but also God, or Eru, as he is called in the universe. Some might argue that Eru is not the Christian God, but Tolkien reveals he is numerous times, but specifically in an interview from 1968, when the interviewer questions who this God in The Lord of the Rings is. The One, of course. The book is about the world that God created, the actual world of this planet. Not only is God present in Tolkien's world, but he actually credits God for inventing the world, rather than claiming he invented it himself. This is also clear sometimes when you read Tolkien. It feels like you're discovering the world with him, and even within it, Tolkien doesn't always know all the answers, and some mysteries remain mysteries forever. And this ties perfectly to another fundamental part to understand about Tolkien. He was a myth man. He loved mythology and fairy stories, and even wrote a whole essay about the latter. In that essay, we actually get an idea what it means to enter his world and the world of other fairy stories. We enter the other world, or fairy, as Tolkien called it. Within it are certain rules, and unlike our world, the maps are still uncharted, mysteries remain, and things are often more than they seem. This brings us to the philosophy of Middle-earth, which I'll also cover in detail in a separate video at some point. Chapter 2. Cosmology of Middle-earth. When we talk about the philosophy of Middle-earth, we are actually discussing the cosmology of Middle-earth. Cosmology means study of the universe, or study of the world. Despite Middle-earth being our world, in the imaginary and mythical past, there are certain differences. Here we can encounter mountains, like Caradhras, that seems to have a personality of its own, and objects, like the ring, which seems to have a will of its own. There are even objects that can talk, like the talking purse of William, the troll in The Hobbit, or Turin's sword, Gurthang. The world has other rules than ours, which only adds more to the mystery and sparks the curious minds to learn more about the world. Now this brings us to fetishism. And yes, I know, sadly, that word has a different ring to it these days, but a fetish means an object believed to have supernatural powers, or in particular, a man-made object that has the powers over others. Hopefully you can already hear the One Ring fits the description. In our day and age, this is widely believed to be superstition, so untrue in other words. And this is important when we come to the conclusion, but let's move on. Chapter 3. What is the Lord of the Rings truly about? If I asked you what the Lord of the Rings is about, you might say it's about a group of hobbits venturing into the world with a quest to destroy the One Ring. Now that's a very simple way of putting it, but you might take a step deeper and say it's about friendship, mercy, hope, temptation, and overcoming evil. And while that's certainly true, it is about something far deeper. To use a common metaphor, it is only the tip of the iceberg. And based on what the showrunners of the Rings of Power have said, they seem only to know this part. So what is the Lord of the Rings truly about? Well, let's take it from the author himself. In the Lord of the Rings, the conflict is not basically about freedom, though that is naturally involved. It is about God and his sole right to divine honor. The Eldar and the Númenóreans believed in the one, the true God, and held worship of any other person an abomination. Sauron desired to be a god king, and was held to be this by his servants. If he had been victorious, he would have demanded divine honor from all rational creatures and absolute temporal power over the whole world. Once again, this fits perfectly with what we have already discussed. A fundamental element of the world, and all conflicts in it, ties the god and those that oppose his sole right to divine honor. And this naturally brings us to the next topic. Chapter 4. The nature of evil. The nature of evil ties neatly with the philosophy of St. Augustine, the Augustinian nature of evil. Augustine believed that everything created by God is fundamentally good, reflecting God's own goodness. Evil, in his view, is not a substance or a created thing, but rather a privation or absence of good, a distortion of the good nature that God originally created. This is essential in understanding what evil is in Middle-earth. It is simply the absence of good, and it cannot exist without good. It depends upon it. Like coldness is the absence of warmth, or darkness, the absence of light. Both of these elements are also implemented into the works, as many of you might have discovered yourselves. This is also why Melkor wasn't evil in the beginning. It was when he decided to bring glory to himself instead of God that he created the discord in the music of the Ainur. Likewise, Sauron wasn't evil in the beginning, as Elrond points out at the Council of Elrond. This also means that in theory all beings are good to begin with, but those we consider evil have been twisted and corrupted. They go against Eru Ilúvatar or his intentions. That is why men should not desire immortality, and why killing and destroying also goes against his intentions. As Aule says in the Silmarillion, he created the dwarves because the desire for creation stems from the ultimate creator of all, Eru Ilúvatar. There are of course creations that goes against Eru's will, like the One Ring, or the evil devices of the orcs, whose sole purpose is to kill as many as possible. These objects are used to control, dominate, and destroy, which is important to remember and understand. One of the tools of the enemy is lies and deception. Not only is Sauron called the Deceiver, but the evil in the world can all be traced back to Melkor's rebellion, his discord in the music of the Ainur. This made the whole of Arda Morgoth's ring. Yet the lies that Melkor, the mighty and accursed, Morgoth Bauglir, the power of terror and of hate, sowed in the hearts of elves and men, are a seed that does not die and cannot be destroyed, and ever and anon it sprouts anew and will bear dark fruit even unto the latest days. This is also why it's perilous to study too long and too deeply the arts of the enemy. His lies and deception will infiltrate your mind, so one should avoid knowing evil too well. This includes Sauron and Morgoth. This is why we know so little about them. Tolkien had a great fear in diving too far into their mindset. But if the world is full of lies, can't it be hard to discern between evil and good, you might ask? Yes, at times it can be, but to that, we must take Aragorn's words to heart. How shall a man judge what to do in such times, as he ever has judged, said Aragorn. Good and ill have not changed since yesteryear, nor are they one thing among elves and dwarves, and another among men. It is a man's part to discern them, as much in the golden wood as in his own house. Chapter 5. What makes a hero? Aragorn is a prime example of the ideal hero, not only in Tolkien's world, but in general. This is also why so many love the character deeply. But interestingly enough, Tolkien's heroes seem somewhat different than most, both in the past, but perhaps even more so today. Four of the greatest heroes of the Fellowship all reflect qualities found in Christ: Gandalf the prophet, Aragorn the king, Frodo the priest, and Sam the common man and servant. Gandalf functions as a guide, mentor, and revealer of truths, often providing insight and wisdom to the other characters, especially Frodo. His role mirrors that of a prophet who conveys the will and guidance of a higher power, something that fits perfectly, given he is a Maiar. Aragorn is the rightful heir to the throne of Gondor, and his journey is one of reclaiming his kingship and fulfilling his destiny as a leader and protector of his people. This aligns with the traditional role of the king. In a certain way, he is also a symbol of the true return of the king. Frodo's role as a priestly figure is seen in his self-sacrifice and bearing of the ring, which can be interpreted as a burden of sin. He is humble when he accepts the task of being the ring bearer. He acts as an intercessor, taking on the suffering necessary to achieve the salvation of Middle-earth. This is also reflected in the end, when it becomes clear he did not save the Shire for himself, but for the common good and others. Another Christ-like act of him is when he wants to spare the life of Saruman, though he tried to murder him. Sam's role is that of the faithful servant and also the common man of the story. Unlike most others, he does not descend from great heroes and kings, nor from a wealthy family like the other hobbits. Another hero I'd like to bring up is that of Faramir, a warrior of wisdom, I'd call him. He is quick to reject the ring because he knows it cannot be used for good. On top of that, he is merciful and protects his country out of love and not for his own selfish ambitions. There are several connections between him and Tolkien, but we can discuss that another time. So to sum it up, these heroes all reflect very Christian qualities and embody ideals for mankind to strive for. Chapter 6. A Tale of Death and Deathlessness. In Middle-earth, time and mortality plays a central role, especially for the characters. While God plays a central role in the story, Tolkien also explains in letter 203 that the story is about something deeper. The tale is not really about power and dominion, that only sets the wheels going. It is about death and the desire for deathlessness, which is hardly more than to say it is a tale written by a man. Deep within almost every character, and even race, there seems a longing for the past, and that the world is in decline. In the end, all things must end, even Middle-earth itself, until it is remade in the second music of the Ainur, where elves and men shall also play a part. Until then, it is the long defeat, as Galadriel calls it in the Fellowship of the Ring. He has dwelt in the west since the days of dawn, and I have dwelt with him years uncounted. For ere the fall of Nargothrond or Gondolin, I passed over the mountains, and together through ages of the world, we have fought a long defeat. A long defeat we must endure, though the fight against evil will forever go on, and likewise, the world will slowly decay until its undoing. It is a persistent resistance and faithfulness, despite apparent hopelessness. If we do this, we embody a kind of noble perseverance. I think it is within us all to long for a more glorious, though maybe mythical, past. A time when things were better, made more sense, and this desire is reflected in Middle-earth. Gondor at the time of the War of the Ring is but a shadow of its golden era. Likewise, that is only a shadow of the splendor of Númenor, and that is but a shadow of Gondolin, which in turn is barely anything compared to Tirion in the west, and the two trees, and even before that, the music of the Ainur. It can be interpreted as a longing to be reunited with God, which may seem odd at first, but given what we have already discussed, it doesn't seem that unlikely after all. Chapter 7. Conclusion. The fundamental problem of the Rings of Power. So what exactly does the Rings of Power do wrong? Perhaps I should start by saying that there are certain people out there desperately grasping for straws in this series, claiming how Tolkienian it all is. And even if some of this is true, it's still only a half-truth, when so much else is wrong, or directly goes against Tolkien's philosophy and lore. God does not seem woven into the very fabric of the story. The Valar are often referred to though, not entirely lore accurate, but Eru is never mentioned, nor does his spirit even seem to be part of the story. While there can be found Christian symbolism in the show, like with Sauron's vision to kill Brimbor, it is in many ways lacking that Christian element, especially in Season 1. And this is actually well connected to another fundamental problem, and that is how they handle morality and in turn, the nature of evil. In the Rings of Power, it seems less clear who is evil and who is good, and you might even question who is what, when Sauron becomes a man trying to find peace, while Galadriel wants to genocide all orcs. There is no god, and no antagonist to oppose him. Instead, we're left with petty villains like Adar, who wants to protect the orcs, Pharazôn, a scheming politician with a racial hatred for elves, though we get little reason for this. And lastly, supposedly good characters like Gil-galad, opposing other good characters. The characters are more morally grey, and the show even went so far to portray the orcs with loving families and not wanting to go to war. Now the latter one is somewhat true, but not because they want peace. They still delight in killing and destroying. It has more to do with them not wanting to serve, just like Sauron doesn't want to serve God. They are in essence the lesser successors of Sauron and his evil. As mentioned in Chapter 4 of this video, Tolkien was afraid of evil not only in his own story, but in the world in general. All too often in his lifetime had he seen it manifested. This is why we should not study too long the arts of the enemy, evil itself. It is not without reason that we know little of the mindset of Morgoth and Sauron. Their evil could easily corrupt the readers themselves. And so the show makes a mistake trying to get closer to Sauron, trying to understand his mindset, especially when they try to make us sympathize with him. This is evil in Tolkien's viewpoint. Morality is ambiguous, and it makes it less clear what the moral conflict of the story really is. Adar opposed Sauron because he does not want to be a slave. Sauron apparently wants to heal Middle-earth, whatever that means. And Galadriel just wants to avenge her dead brother. Safe to say, we have no Christ-like figures, no true heroes, and certainly no heroes that seem to fit into Tolkien's Middle-earth. When it comes to the cosmology, we have Numenor, an island given to the Edain that helped fight against Morgoth. It is a gift by the Valar to men, which is also reflected in the very name of the island. Now in Season 1, it's briefly mentioned the island was granted to these men, but it wasn't simply granted to them. It was created specifically for them. It is in many ways a sacred land, which is also why there were no diseases on the island. In fact, the Númenóreans would actually be cured simply by being on the island. Likewise, there were no real predators on the island. Yet in the show, it just seems like an island in the middle of nowhere. Once again, the divine powers seem lacking and is almost taken out of things. We see the creation of the rings, which seems to be reduced to simply elements mixed together, while magic in Middle-earth often comes down to words and song. And yes, I'll make a whole video about that as well. And don't even get me started on Sauron turning into Eleven from Stranger Things. We even get origin stories for stuff we didn't need, something that kills the mystery and also takes out the divine elements from Tolkien's story. We see it with Gandalf, who now has to find his staff somewhere in a random desert, perhaps even his hat. It is the same with Bombadil, a truly enigmatic character reduced to a hermit in the east. The whole Lord of the Istari seems reduced from angelic spirits sent to help the peoples of Middle-earth against Sauron to random wizards spawning and doing whatever. There are other mythical elements that seem reduced to mere objects, like Morgoth's crown, that somehow is still around, and Fëanor's hammer, now used to forge the 9 rings. Simply by showing them, you have reduced the mystery surrounding these artifacts. They are less mythical, and now just simple objects. Objects that should be more like characters, but now just objects as we would view them today. And this is related to fetishism, as mentioned in Chapter 2. In our day and age, it's believed to be a lie, And this actually comes across, even though it's not intentional. It's simply hard to believe these objects are magical. It's something I think Peter Jackson does well in regards to the One Ring, as both music, actors, and the very visuals makes us feel uneasy about it. It is clear from the start that there is more to this ring than just gold. Oddly enough, the show even actively tries to destroy some of the mythical elements, like with Círdan, slanders Rúmil and Daeron, though I'm not sure how or when he would have met Rúmil. I would even say they do that when simply putting some things on screen, like Númenor, the greatest civilization of men, yet it seems just like an island with one big city. It looks big, yet the scenes all seem to take place the same few locations. Even Grey Havens is reduced from this to this sorry excuse of a Skyrim village, and Pelargia, another village, a ruin, or whatever this is supposed to be. Lastly, the show does not believe in longing for the past, most likely because the showrunners do not share that mindset. The show is full of modern ideals and presentism. If you are unfamiliar with the term presentism, it is a term for the introduction of present-day ideas and perspectives into depictions or interpretations of the past. This is often used in regards to historical analysis, where many scholars try to avoid it, as it is a form of cultural bias, and it tends to create a distorted understanding of whatever the subject is. In the Rings of Power, this comes to light in many ways, though we may not be aware of them all, as some of these things have been normalized in the West. This has to do with gender roles, like how most of the women in the show are girl bosses, is allowed to take whatever profession they want, can fight in war in general, and lastly, is allowed to speak and be present in all situations. Now I'm not saying I'm against that in the modern world, but it's important to remember Middle-earth is not the modern world. So these things should be treated differently if you want a more true vision of Tolkien's world. And this brings us to another issue that the showrunners are fully aware of. Peter Jackson tried to make the Lord of the Rings look like the distant past, while the Rings of Power wants the world of Middle-earth to reflect what modern day looks like. Well, or rather what it looks like in certain places of the West. This is why we have characters of pretty much every ethnicity imaginable. Now that in itself may not be bad, but it does take you out of the story, or rather fairy, if not handled correctly. You can have characters of various races, but it needs to make sense within the universe, which sadly is just not the case. Presentism is also quite evident in how it's often the younger generation in the show that knows best, while the older generation is wrong, narrow-minded, or similar slurs, mainly used today in regards to boomers, or even older generations. This is quite the contrary in Middle-earth, where there is a lot of respect for the elder generation, and the wisest are often some of the oldest. Another modern concept is how older men, especially white men, seems to take a step back to make way for the women and people of color. The men are often weak, foolish, wrong, or extremely emotional. Even the villains cry in the show. In fact, every single character seems to cry at some point. Lastly, even for the marketing of Season 1, presentism seems evident, which I've also pointed out in the past. This is reflected in the song of the trailer and also Illidan's line about burying the past and moving forward. Many fans interpreted this as a direct hint to Tolkien and his wider lore. It is time to bury what he actually wrote and update it for modern audiences. Sadly, I believe this is correct. This is exactly what the showrunners want. And that is exactly why The Rings of Power fails. They not only think themselves superior to Tolkien, but they also try to update and change his work, which results in a soulless product, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. It's been an honor diving into this topic, and if you're still watching, thank you very much. Please share this video and consider supporting the channel if you like what I do here. Special thanks to all the members and patrons of the channel. Your support means the world to me. May the hair on your toes never fall out. If you want to learn more about Middle-earth, this video might be for you. Farewell till next time.